In this video, we're going to be talking about Rabbi Yosef Karo, the great author of the Shulchan Aruch, and he is known in many places as the Mechaber, as the author, when in reference to the Shulchan Aruch, or the Beis Yosef, the name of one of his other books, as we'll talk about shortly. He was born in 1488 in Toledo, Spain, at the age of 4 in 1492. He was expelled with his family from Spain during the Great Expulsion. They made their way to Portugal, where again there was another expulsion, and they were expelled from Portugal. Eventually, they wander around, and they make their way to Constantinople in Turkey, or at the Ottoman Empire at the time. His main teacher at that time was Rabbi Ephraim, his father. Rabbi Yosef was also influenced after his father's passing. His main teacher, again, this is all on the run in a new place, unfamiliar settings, was his uncle Rabbi Yitzchak, and eventually they settle in Turkey. At some point they also wandered around in that area, in Andropol, I think it's pronounced, and he eventually is appointed rabbi in Bulgaria for a period of time. Eventually, he makes his way to Safed, Israel, and he had been married at the age of 20 to a woman who passed away. So he's remarried. He makes his way to Sfas, and he lives there. In Sfas, Rabbi Yosef Karo becomes one of the great teachers of Torah of the Jewish nation. At that time, there was a tremendous amount of Jewish scholarship in that area. You have his own students, Rabbi Shlomo Alkabetz, who becomes well known as the author of Lechadodi, Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, a great Kabbalist, Rabbi Arizal, of course, one of the greatest influences of Kabbalah at the time, the Alshich, who was also a student of Rabbi Karo, and others. One of the most famous people of the time was Rabbi Yaakov Beirav, and he wanted to reinstitute the practice of smicha, of the institute of having a tradition passed down from generation to generation, something that had stopped in the Second Temple period following a Roman decree, and there was no longer a direct transmission from Moses to that somebody could be like a true a true person to have received the tradition, I guess is the best way to say it. And so therefore, the Rabbi Yaakov Beirav understood that they could really restart smicha if they had enough people who would be on the level to receive smicha, and they could do so. So they made him the first rabbi to get smicha, Rabbi Yaakov Beirav, and then one of the first people he in turn gave smicha to was Rabbi Yosef Karo, the Beis Yosef. Eventually, after Rabbi Yaakov's passing, Rabbi Yosef Karo becomes the default leader of that Jewish community. Eventually, he passes. His wife passed away, and as we'll get to in a second about his books that he wrote, he was also a Shulchan Aruch, which means he was an observant Jew. He also followed the Shulchan Aruch, which he would write. And he remarries in his late 70s, and he has another child in his 80s, because, as it says in Shulchan Aruch, a person should not live alone. That is considered inappropriate for a man to live alone. It's not good for a man to live alone, so he remarries, and he has another child in his late 80s, in his 80s. And he passed away at the age of 87 and is buried in Sfas. So now that we talked a little bit about his biographical story, we're going to get into who he was as far as his scholarship. As we mentioned, he was a Spanish Jew, and he ends up running away and living in Constantinople and then in Israel. So his influence on his scholarship was very much of the Sephardic style. So the first thing that he did was he wrote a commentary on the Tur. We talked about last time about the Tur, who was the son of the Rosh, who wrote a commentary on the Torah called the Arba Turim. So Rabbi Yosef Karo wrote a commentary on the Tur, and it's very obvious that he had a very, for whatever reason, it's hard to imagine at the time, but he had a tremendous amount of access to manuscripts and books, because he's born in 1488, and 1440s is when the printing press is invented. So that's probably a correlation between that and his tremendous access. And he writes this book where he basically takes the Torah. So the Torah will say, okay, the law is, based on this, it's such and such. And Rabbi Yosef Karo will start from the Talmud, and he'll say, okay, the Talmud says this, the Gaonim said this, and the Rishonim, the Rashba says this, the Ran says this, the Rambam says this, Rashi says this, the Tosfot says this, and he breaks down and he brings it all in into a very beautiful way. You could see how the law was built. And again, this is kind of the challenge of Jewish law, is trying to get the reasons and then the scholarship of it and to the practical law. So the Torah wrote a book of the practical law. So the Beis Yosef writes a book that's basically breaking it down into the reasons behind it. He also wrote a commentary on the Rambam, on Maimonides, and he eventually, after he writes these commentaries, he writes a book called the Shulchan Aruch, the set table. And he calls it a set table because just like a set table, everything is ready. You have all these wonderful delicacies, all ready to eat. So too, his book is already, the Shulchan Aruch is set. There's no, again, he now says, okay, I wrote the book that is the Beis Yosef, all the reasons, and this is kind of an addendum to that, where now everybody could just have the simple law. And he actually writes besides the fact that he is now taking more of a Sephardic approach to the law, which we'll get in a second, how he did that. He also writes in the Sephardic, you want to say, more influenced by Sephardic approach as far as Maimonides, that he writes in the style of Maimonides very much to the law. There's no reasons. Again, this time he wrote his own book of the reasons of why he got his conclusions. And he also does not talk so much about customs. And he focuses more on law, and he does not really bring dissenting opinions. If he does, he'll kind of say, okay, the law is like this, and some say that you could follow a different opinion in certain circumstances, or you could do something else to get around it. So that's kind of his style, very in the Maimonidean style of Jewish law of halacha. So after he wrote this Beis Yosef, he writes the Shulchan Aruch, and it becomes, again, the printing press is available at this time, so it becomes widely disseminated across the Jewish world and becomes probably the most accepted code of Jewish law ever. And he said that the way he worked was that he would consult his Beit Din, his court, his Jewish court, which was the Rambam, the Rif, and the Rush. We discussed these people in previous videos, and the Rambam and the Rif are Sephardic, and Rabbi Asher, the Rush, was Ashkenazi. And so he said, if there's a tiebreaker, he would go to these three, and whichever was the majority, he would follow. So many Ashkenazi Jews felt that he relied too much on the Sephardic tradition versus following just in the, because he has two Sephardic rabbis versus one Ashkenazi rabbi. At any rate, it's a little bit of a misnomer, because it's not that he took, it was just kind of like, okay, a scorecard, 2 out of 3. In most of these laws, again, if you look at the Beis Yosef, you could see how he takes into account many, many opinions. There are many laws that are not found in the Rambam, the Rif, or the Rush. They're found in the Rashba and the Ran and the Ramban. Again, these are other Rishonim of the previous generation. And you can really see the style of the Acharonim, which Rabbi Yosef Karo is now part of this generation of the early Acharonim, which is no longer focusing on understanding the Talmud, but now basically the Rishonim understood the Talmud, and now how do we understand them? How do we understand their laws and their understandings, and how do we bring that into practical halacha? It took the Beis Yosef. He took the Mechaber, as he's called, the author, or if in his work of the Beis Yosef, took him about 20 years to write the Beis Yosef, much less to write the Shulchan Aruch, because again, it's just a simple law. But they really are a compendium, because similar to the Mishnah, where the Talmud kind of breaks down the Mishnah, you actually have your own breakdown of the Shulchan Aruch. So if you see in the Shulchan Aruch, you'll say, okay, why did the Mechaber, why did the author of the Shulchan Aruch, the Beis Yosef, Rabbi Yosef Karo, why did he change from the way of the Torah? Why did he change the way of Maimonides? Why did he quote Maimonides in this scenario? And he's very exacting in his language where you can break down and see why he chose this language. So in other words, even things that are, it's not always super clear why he chose a certain law, a certain language of a certain law, or only quotes a certain law. You have to go back to his Beis Yosef, and you could kind of see his thought process, because in the Beis Yosef he doesn't really come to conclusions the same way. He's also clearly influenced by Kabbalah, by Jewish mysticism. He quotes the Zohar in the Beis Yosef as the rationale for certain laws. And he, again, one of his main students was Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, who is a tremendous Kabbalist, and of course one of his contemporaries in Sifas as well was the Arizal. It's also said that his students wrote that he had a Magid, which is kind of an angel who was the soul of the soul of the Mishnah, that would come at night and teach him. And this was actually published in a book. A small portion of these encounters was published. It's not clear who exactly wrote them down, one of his students or he himself wrote these encounters down. And this was published in a book as well about his encounters with this Magid. And he also, again, we could see even in his scholarship on Jewish law, you could see the influence of Kabbalah on this. And there's a tremendous story as well related to this, is the Tikkun Leil Shavuos, the special learning that we do on the night of Shavuos. Is customary to stay up the entire night of the holiday of Shavuos, and there's an introduction there that talks about this encounter with this soul of the Mishnah that is recorded there, that told them to study Mishnayos, and like this they would reach great spiritual levels. Tremendous, really a crazy story where these great rabbis of Sifas of this golden age encounter this Magid figure. The Arizal is quoted to have said, and by his student Rabbi Chaim Vital, that he had the soul of Rabbi Yehuda Bar Ilai, which was one of the great Amoraim. He also had some sort of connection of a soul connection with the Rashba, Rabbi Shlomo ben Aderet, which is somebody he quotes often as well in his code of Jewish law, or in the Beis Yosef. And really his legacy, as far as his Jewish legacy, is the Shulchan Aruch, and it becomes not just the most accepted code of Jewish law, again using the previous system of the Torah, of just focusing on laws of practical laws of our time in exile, and becomes the standard. Again, we'll see in the coming weeks about how this developed, as well as where there more addendums were made to the Shulchan Aruch. But the Shulchan Aruch becomes the basis for all Jewish law, and becomes accepted across Jewish people as this is the basis of Jewish law, and it becomes like an expression, like we said, you're a Shulchan Aruch Yid, means someone who's Torah observant. It becomes, colloquial as well, and definitely some of the most the most accepted way of practicing Jewish law, of practicing Judaism, is based on the Shulchan Aruch. As well, his Beis Yosef commentary leaves a tremendous legacy. I like to joke that it's the most plagiarized book in the history of the Jewish people. Later, there were people who went into the Shulchan Aruch and wrote all the sources for the different laws, and they wrote in parentheses, okay, this is the source. How do they know the source? They went to the Beis Yosef, where he breaks down the whole way of how halacha came down, and starting from the Talmud. And they just wrote the sources. That it seems that, and there's a lot of mistakes in that as well. It's clear that he didn't write it. But it becomes, the basis of many, many books. Is you no longer have to look in the Talmud and, then look in the Rishonim. It's all laid out for you in the Beis Yosef. Until today, it's very plagiarized. Again, I'm being facetious, but it's a very plagiarized book. Everyone loves to use it. And it's also standard for rabbis studying Smicha. They'll learn the Torah with the Beis Yosef. It just kind of goes along, because you could get a very simple, very, very easily get to the whole chain of how this law broke down. So now you understand where it's coming from and how you could apply it in different situations. And his commentary on the Rambam as well is used till today. The Kesef Mishnah is also very important commentary. He has descendants till today. I actually knew a lady whose last name was Karo. Till today, he has descendants, but of course his spiritual legacy is the Shulchan Aruch, the Beis Yosef, the Kesef Mishnah, and his tremendous influence on Jewish law. And lastly, just to finish up a short story, it says that he, in one of his books, in this book about this Maggid, Rabbi Yosef Karo saw a converso, a Jew who was burned at the stake for his belief in Judaism, and Rabbi Yosef Karo said that he wanted also to give up his life for Al Kiddush Hashem, to sanctify God's name. And he was, at certain points in his life, he was granted this, and then eventually it was taken away from him. The Maggid told him that for whatever reason he was no longer he did not merit to give up his life to sanctify God's name. And in fact, he got to write the Shulchan Aruch, which is a book which is till this day, for 500 years later, is still used. So just some food for thought, that the idea that Rabbi Yosef Karo's giving up his life, that merit of giving up his life to sanctify God's name, would have been was more important than writing a code of Jewish law that sustains the Jewish people to this day. So just some food for thought. If you have any questions, comments, something I should have said or could have said, please leave in the comments below. This is a little bit longer video. This is a very big topic, Rabbi Yosef Karo. We could go for an hour probably and still not get to everything, but just a little brief synopsis of his life, history, and legacy. And looking forward to seeing some of the comments.